When Denzel Washington publicly challenges former President Donald Trump during a critical moment in American politics, his words ignite a nationwide conversation that stops the country in its tracks. What begins as a single powerful speech evolves into a movement that reshapes the national discourse on leadership, justice, and unity. Through personal struggles, political turmoil, and moments of unexpected courage, this story follows the ripple effect of one man's voice when it dares to confront power and inspire change. It was a tense evening in Washington, D.C., the nation already divided over recent political controversies. At a high-profile charity event, Denzel Washington took the stage not to perform, but to speak, and what he said would echo far beyond the room. With calm authority, he challenged Donald Trump's leadership, calling for accountability and unity in a time of crisis. The room fell silent as his words cut through the noise, demanding reflection from a country at a crossroads. News outlets quickly picked up Denzel's speech, broadcasting his message nationwide. Social media exploded with reactions. Some praised his courage, others attacked him fiercely. But no one could ignore the impact. His voice seemed to give many Americans permission to speak out, to question, and to demand better from those in power. Behind the scenes, Denzel faced his own doubts. The stakes were high, and he knew challenging a former president was no small task. Yet his conviction was stronger than fear. For him, this was about more than politics. It was about the soul of a nation struggling to find its way. As the evening ended, the country had changed, not overnight, but in that moment, a seed had been planted. The question now was, how far would it grow? The morning after speech, headlines across the country buzzed with reactions. Talk shows debated the boldness of his challenge, while social media platforms became battlegrounds of opinion. Supporters felt energized, seeing Denzel as a voice for honesty and hope. Critics accused him of overstepping, inflaming tensions in an already divided nation. Meanwhile, political figures scrambled to respond. Some distanced themselves from Trump's policies, hinting at a shift in allegiance. Others doubled down, attacking Denzel's credibility and questioning his motives. The atmosphere grew charged with uncertainty and anticipation, dotting communities, large and small. Conversations sparked about leadership, truth, and responsibility. Denzel's words gave many a spark to question long-held beliefs and to seek deeper understanding. For Denzel, the storm was just beginning. His challenge had not only stopped the country, it had awakened it. Behind the public spectacle, Denzel Washington prepared for what lay ahead. Advisors warned him of the backlash, the media frenzy, and the potential risks to his career. But Denzel remained steadfast. For years, he had observed the nation's struggles and now felt compelled to step forward. His family stood firmly by his side, offering support and grounding him amid the chaos. They reminded him of the purpose behind his voice: to inspire change, not division. Denzel also reached out to activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens. Listening to their stories, hopes, and fears, he found renewed strength and clarity. He realized that this was not a solo fight. It was a collective journey toward healing. Inspired by Denzel's speech, grassroots groups began organizing protests, forums, and campaigns demanding transparency and accountability from political leaders. The energy was palpable. People from diverse backgrounds united in a shared cause. Celebrities, influencers, and politicians joined the chorus, amplifying the message. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles explored the issues Denzel raised, and motivating millions that the movement was no longer just words, it was action. Town halls erupted with passionate debates, and voting registrations soared through it all. Denzel remained a steady symbol of courage and hope. As the movement gained momentum, opposition forces mobilized. Powerful media outlets launched smear campaigns against Denzel, painting him as a disruptor and agitator. Online trolls flooded social media with misinformation and attacks. Trump supporters rallied, organizing counter-protests and framing the movement as divisive. Political polarization deepened, and tensions flared across the country. Denzel felt the weight of the attacks, but refused to retreat. He knew that speaking truth often came with sacrifice. The battle for America's soul had entered a critical phase. Amid the chaos, Denzel experienced moments of doubt. The personal attacks stung, and the enormity of the challenge was overwhelming. He questioned if his voice could truly make a difference, or if the country was too fractured to heal. Late, Nights were filled with reflection and conversations with close confidants. He reminded himself why he began this journey: hope, justice, and unity. Drawing on his resilience and faith, Denzel recommitted to the cause, knowing that change was a marathon, not a sprint. Recognizing the urgency, leaders from both sides of the political aisle agreed to a historic summit, inviting Denzel as a mediator and voice of the people. The event was broadcast live, watched by millions eager for solutions. Denzel spoke passionately about the need to listen, to empathize, and to rebuild trust. His eloquence and sincerity broke through partisan rhetoric, touching hearts on all sides. While no immediate agreements were reached, the summit opened a crucial dialogue and planted seeds for future collaboration. For many, it was a glimpse of hope in turbulent times. The journey took a toll on Denzel's personal life. The constant scrutiny strained relationships, and moments of solitude were rare. Yet his family remained his anchor, reminding him of the bigger picture. He also faced challenges, balancing his activism with his career and privacy. Paparazzi and critics invaded his personal space, but Denzel stayed grounded. He found solace in small joys: a quiet walk, time with loved ones, and moments of gratitude. These personal sacrifices underscored the cost of courage. Months into the movement, public opinion began to shift. Polls showed increasing support for the ideals Denzel championed. Young voters turned out in record numbers, and community leaders reported greater engagement. New legislation addressing transparency and accountability was proposed. Inspired by the movement's pressure, Denzel's voice had helped open doors previously closed by cynicism and apathy. The country still faced many challenges, but a turning point had been reached: a collective awakening. As the dust settled, Denzel Washington's challenge was seen as a defining moment in American history. His courage to speak out against power inspired a generation to engage in their democracy actively. Though the journey toward justice and unity was ongoing, the movement had created lasting institutions, inspired leaders, and renewed hope. Denzel returned to his craft, forever changed, but proud of the impact his voice had made. The country had stopped to listen and was now ready to act. The energy of the younger generation became a driving force behind the movement. Students across the country organized rallies and educational campaigns, demanding a future defined by justice and integrity. Denzel often visited campuses, inspiring young activists with stories of resilience and hope. Their passion reminded him that change was not just about today, but the promise of tomorrow. The youth's voices grew louder, refusing to be ignored. Recognizing the nation's deep divisions, Denzel launched an initiative aimed at fostering dialogue between opposing communities. Town halls and listening sessions brought people together to share stories and find common ground. The process was not easy. Distrust and anger surfaced frequently, but slowly, empathy began to replace hostility. This bridge building became a cornerstone of the movement's vision for a united country. The movement also sparked a critical examination of the media's influence on public opinion. Denzel advocated for responsible journalism and transparency in reporting. Media outlets faced pressure to address biases and promote balanced coverage. The public became more discerning, seeking trustworthy sources. This shift empowered citizens to engage more thoughtfully in political discourse, challenging misinformation and sensationalism. With growing visibility came legal challenges. Denzel and key activists faced lawsuits intended to intimidate and silence them. The courts became another battleground for justice. Undeterred, the movement rallied legal support, turning trials into platforms to expose systemic flaws. These confrontations highlighted the resilience required to confront entrenched power structures and inspired widespread solidarity. The movement's message resonated beyond the United States. International human rights organizations and activists reached out, offering solidarity and support. Denzel engaged in dialogues with global leaders, sharing strategies and learning from other struggles. This international alliance reinforced the universal quest for justice and emphasized that the fight was part of a broader human story. Artists and performers embraced the movement, using their crafts to amplify its themes. Music, theater, and visual arts became powerful tools for storytelling and mobilization. Denzel collaborated with creators to produce works that captured the spirit of the movement and reached wider audiences. This cultural wave deepened emotional connections and inspired collective action. the movement expanded its scope to address economic disparities fueling social unrest. Denzel spoke candidly about poverty, unemployment, and systemic barriers. Campaigns promoted policies aimed at fair wages, education, access, and healthcare. By connecting economic justice to political reform, the movement attracted new allies and deepened its impact on national conversations. Like any growing movement, internal conflicts emerged. Differing strategies, priorities, and personalities sometimes clashed. Denzel took on a mediating role, emphasizing respect and shared goals. Through transparent communication and mutual understanding, the collective strengthened its unity. These challenges, while difficult, proved essential for building a resilient and adaptive movement. Personal narratives became a vital element of the movement's influence. Denzel encouraged individuals to share their experiences of injustice and hope. These stories humanized abstract issues, creating empathy and urgency. Media platforms featured testimonials, fostering a sense of community and shared purpose. The power of storytelling connected hearts and minds across divides. As the movement reshaped public consciousness, political landscapes shifted. Candidates embracing the movement's principles gained traction, signaling a transformation in leadership. Denzel observed with cautious optimism as new policies and reforms took shape. While the road ahead remained complex, the political arena began reflecting the values and demands of a more engaged citizenry. The movement had evolved far beyond one man. Denzel's speech had triggered something deeper, a hunger for honesty. Across the country, people began having hard conversations. Families sat down to talk about race, inequality, and truth. At town halls and churches, strangers gathered to listen rather than argue. Denzel wasn't leading marches every day now. Instead, he helped create safe spaces for dialogue, real, raw, and often painful. In those rooms, breakthroughs happened, not because someone won the argument, but because someone chose to listen. He knew change didn't live on stages. It lived in living rooms, classrooms, and late-night phone calls between friends who didn't understand each other yet. This was no longer about politics. It was about people finally facing the mirror. As the movement spread, so did resistance. Political commentators on right-wing networks called Denzel a divisive celebrity. Campaigns were launched to discredit him, twisting his words and questioning his motives. They feared what he represented. An awakening. Threats followed. Anonymous messages, cancelled appearances, private investigators digging into his past. The pressure was relentless, but Denzel remained calm. He'd expected the backlash. If you don't make some people uncomfortable, he said, you're not challenging anything. The louder the critics got, the more people leaned in to listen. Because deep down, the country knew something was broken. Denzel launched a digital platform called Unheard, where people from marginalized communities could share their stories unfiltered. A teacher who worked unpaid hours in a forgotten school. A father wrongly imprisoned for a decade. A teenager stopped by police for the color of his skin. The stories weren't dramatic. They were real. And that's what made them powerful. Within weeks, Unheard reached millions. News outlets tried to ignore it, but the people didn't. Podcasts, influencers, and students shared the clips, quoting them in classrooms and dinner tables alike. Suddenly, America wasn't just looking at Denzel, it was listening to itself. The movement wasn't without sacrifice. Some of Denzel's close friends distanced themselves. Brand deals vanished. Projects he'd nurtured for years were shelved. Every move became politicized. He stayed grounded by journaling, walking alone at night, and calling his mother, who reminded him, your peace can't depend on their approval. Others in the movement faced worse. Local organizers were harassed, doxxed, and arrested. But their courage only inspired more to step forward. Denzel once said to a group of students, if we want a country that values truth, we have to be ready to pay the price for it. And they were. High school students began organizing town halls. College kids launched curriculum reforms. One 16-year-old girl went viral for confronting her school board over a biased textbook. Her voice cracked, but she never backed down. Denzel watched it unfold with quiet pride. He didn't need to speak anymore. They were speaking now. He began mentoring from the background, not leading, but listening, helping young leaders sharpen their focus and hold their ground. This wasn't a trend, it was a shift. A generation raised on silence was now fluent in courage. The entertainment industry couldn't ignore the shift. Studios commissioned scripts centered on real, nuanced stories. Networks hired new voices. Artists began rejecting stereotypical roles, demanding substance. Denzel was approached to produce a miniseries based on the movement. He accepted on one condition: real people from the communities must write it. The show aired months later. It wasn't flashy. It was honest, and it broke every viewership record. For the first time, millions saw not just struggle, but dignity. With elections looming, the movement faced a dilemma: stay grassroots or engage politically. Some feared corruption, others saw opportunity. Debates broke out online and in real life. Denzel didn't dictate a path. He brought people together, reminded them, it's not about one person or one party. It's about policy, vision, values. They launched the People's Promise, a public list of non-partisan demands rooted in justice, education, and accountability. Any candidate could sign. It wasn't about power. It was about holding power to its word. In rural America, change was slower. Fear ran deeper. Misinformation thrived, but so did quiet hope. A retired veteran organized a dialogue circle. A librarian hosted banned book clubs. A sheriff asked Denzel for help retraining his force. These weren't headlines, but they were milestones. Denzel visited towns where people had never met someone who thought differently. He didn't preach, he asked questions, he told stories, and in return he listened. Sometimes that's all it took. When backlash intensified, Denzel shifted tactics. No more big speeches, just steady presence. He met with lawyers, teachers, grocery clerks, sanitation workers, anyone doing the invisible work of keeping communities whole. He called it the quiet resistance, choosing empathy over fear, truth over comfort. Daily he knew movements don't last if they rely on headlines. They survive in habits, relationships, and routines. That's what he helped build, not a flash of change, but a framework. 1 year after his speech, people marched again, not in rage, but in resolve. From coast to coast, families carried signs that read, "I see you, truth matters, and we keep going." Denzel walked without bodyguards, just a hoodie, a cap, and a deep breath. No chants, no cameras, just silence. As night fell, candles lit up the cities. Millions stood still, remembering, honoring, believing, and for the first time in years, the country felt like it was breathing together again. Denzel shifted focus from awareness to infrastructure. He co-founded Roots, a non-profit that funded local education, mental health clinics, and job programs in underserved areas. He believed that policy matters, but presence changes lives. Roots wasn't charity, it was investment. In cities and towns, kids now had safe places to learn. Parents had support, teachers had resources, and dignity began to return to neighborhoods. Long ignored. Because justice without roots doesn't last. The fight weighed on Denzel. His health declined slightly. He became more reflective, less visible. The pressure of being a symbol was heavier than he'd admitted. He leaned on close friends, therapy, and long hikes where no one recognized him. He returned to his love for music, poetry, and family meals. Sometimes, doing the work meant stepping away. Healing, too, was resistance. He reminded his team, if we burn out, we feed the system we're trying to change. Other nations began referencing Denzel's model. Brazil, South Africa, and the UK invited him to speak with youth coalitions, not as a hero but as a peer. In Chile, a high school played clips of his early speech to teach debate. In Ghana, a filmmaker made a short film inspired by his story. Denzel saw something humbling. This wasn't just America's reckoning, it was a human one. The fight for dignity had no borders. Universities began offering courses on the movement, not just on Denzel's role but on collective action, media impact, and moral courage. He guest lectured at Howard, Stanford, and Morehouse. In each classroom, he said the same thing: don't quote me, question me, build better than me. Students left empowered not to idolize, but to innovate. Legacy, he knew, wasn't about being remembered. It was about being surpassed. Progress wasn't linear. New policies passed, then stalled. Extremism crept back. Voter suppression increased. The cycle tried to repeat itself. But the country was different now. Not perfect, but awake. People responded faster, organized, smarter, pushed harder. Denzel told a young activist, "We're not solving everything, but we're shifting the center of gravity." And sometimes, that's enough to change a nation's course. Denzel met a man who told him, "My son was gonna give up. Then he saw you. Now he's studying law." They hugged. No cameras, no speeches. Just one man grateful to another. These quiet moments filled Denzel more than awards ever had. They reminded him why he'd spoken up in the first place. Not for politics, for people, for futures, for family. Denzel returned to film, but only to tell stories that mattered. He produced a drama about a prison educator, a documentary about single mothers, a play about silence, shame, and second chances. Audiences showed up, not for Denzel the star, but for the truths he illuminated. He believed stories were the soul of culture, and he was determined to help culture heal. He received awards, honorary degrees, a day named after him, but he kept saying the same thing: don't make a statue, make a school. He visited neighborhoods where murals of his face had been painted and instead asked for youth centers. His legacy wasn't an image. It was a mirror, one that helped people see their own power. The country was far from perfect. There were still shootings, injustice, corruption, but there was also vigilance, compassion, response. The difference wasn't who led, but how people responded when truth was threatened. Denzel once whispered to a journalist, "We didn't fix America, but we reminded it that it still could be." That hope had become a habit. In his final public interview, Denzel was asked, "Do you think it was all worth it?" He smiled. "If one kid believed they mattered because I spoke, yeah, it was worth it." He stood up, shook the journalist's hand, and walked out. He wasn't retiring, he was just going home. His work had never been about staying in the spotlight. It was about turning it toward the people who needed to be seen. Years after the movement's peak, its impact remained in subtle but powerful ways. A young lawyer defending tenants quoted one of Denzel's speeches in court. A teacher wore a faded Truth Matters pin while explaining civil rights history. The loudness had faded, but the message lived on in decisions, in courage, in quiet choices no one filmed. Denzel walked through a bookstore one day and saw a teen reading The People's Promise. He didn't interrupt, just smiled and left. That was the kind of legacy he hoped for, seen not in followers, but in footsteps. Years later, Denzel accepted a theater role, his first in a decade. It was a stripped-down play about a black father navigating grief. Set in a single room night after night, people filled the seats, not to see the celebrity, but to feel something real. His performance wasn't flawless, it was raw, vulnerable, human. Critics called it a masterclass in silence. For Denzel, it was healing. The man who once shook a nation was now whispering to its soul. A journalist uncovered an unpublished letter written by Denzel the night before his original challenge speech. In it, he confessed fear, doubt, and uncertainty. "I don't know if this will help or hurt," he wrote, "but silence feels like betrayal." The letter went viral after it was published. Thousands said it made them feel less alone, not just for what Denzel did, but for what he felt. His bravery wasn't in being fearless, it was in showing up despite the fear. Denzel began mentoring in private. No cameras, no podcasts, just real conversations with young activists, artists, and writers. He gave them books, suggested they travel, taught them how to rest without guilt. One mentee described him as a compass, not a map. He didn't offer answers, just direction. In a world of instant fame, he modeled something rarer, long-term. Vicina Museum opened a small exhibit titled Whispers That Moved Us. It displayed posters from protests, handwritten notes, tweets, courtroom sketches, and a single worn hoodie that once belonged to Denzel. Visitors wept quietly, not at the items, but at what they represented: resilience, awakening, possibility. Denzel visited alone, anonymously. He stood in front of his hoodie, then walked out without saying a word. Some history lives best in reverence, not recognition. Years after the initial clash, Denzel met one of his loudest critics, a conservative media personality who had since left politics and was working in prison reform. Their meeting was tense, honest, and unexpectedly compassionate. They disagreed on much, but found common ground on dignity, family, and redemption. The clip was never released. That was their agreement. Some healing isn't for public consumption. Denzel released a memoir titled Not a Hero, Just Awake. It wasn't chronological or polished. It was a series of reflections, messy, honest, unguarded. It became a bestseller, But more than that, it became a resource for people navigating their own inner conflicts. He wrote, "I didn't change the world, but I helped some people change their minds. That's enough for me." And for many readers, that was everything. A young filmmaker released a documentary titled Fathers Like Us, tracing how Denzel's words had impacted black fatherhood in America. It featured men rebuilding relationships with their kids, breaking generational cycles, showing up with tenderness. Denzel appeared only briefly. He wasn't the focus, the fathers were. The message landed loud and clear. Masculinity could hold space for love, accountability, and softness, and change didn't start on a stage. It started at the dinner table. Denzel resisted grand celebrations. On his 80th birthday, a friend asked if he'd accept a national honor. He declined. "I don't want a monument," he said. "I want people to keep showing up for each other." Instead, people posted online photos of protests, classrooms, family dinners, moments when they chose courage because of his influence. That was his monument, built in real time. One night, at a community center, Denzel attended a poetry slam. A teenager stepped up and began a poem titled, "To the Man Who Made Me Speak." It was about finding her voice, feeling seen, daring to believe she mattered. She didn't. No, he was in the back of the room. He didn't tell her afterward. He just left a note that read, "Keep writing, keep leading. I see you." Sometimes, the best recognition is invisible. The movement sparked by Denzel had faded from headlines, but its seeds had rooted deep. Cities adopted new justice models. Rural communities started empathy-based leadership programs. The polarization was still real, but so was the dialogue. America hadn't healed, but it had begun to listen, and that made all the difference. A new director created a fictionalized series inspired by the movement. It was bold, complex, and didn't glorify anyone, especially not Denzel. He insisted, "Make me flawed, make it real." The show won awards, but more importantly, it sparked hard conversations. Art wasn't just entertainment now, it was accountability. In his final public appearance, Denzel read a letter he'd written to his 18-year-old self. It said, "You'll be scared, silenced, celebrated, and misunderstood. But if you keep your soul intact, it will be worth it." He folded the paper slowly, looked out at the crowd, and simply said, "I kept going. So can you." And then he walked off stage. Years passed. His presence faded from media, but teachers still quoted him. Parents told their children stories of courage. His name was no longer shouted. It was whispered, like a prayer. Not out of worship, out of gratitude, because he reminded a country not of who he was, but of who it could be. Denzel lived out his final years quietly, surrounded by books, trees, and loved ones. He left no big farewell, no autobiography sequel, no tours, just a letter left to the public after his passing. "Don't make me a legend, make yourselves leaders." And with that, the story ended, not in silence, but in action. A young boy stood in front of his class, holding a tattered copy of Not a Hero, Just Awake. He said it belonged to his late grandfather, who once met Denzel. The room fell silent as the boy read aloud one of the passages. It wasn't just about politics or protest. It was about courage when no one is watching. His teacher wiped away a tear, not because the words were sad, but because they were still needed. Legacy, it seemed, could travel farther than bloodlines. It could live in intention. A city bench, once used by Denzel to give a quiet speech during the early days of the unrest, was marked by a small plaque. He sat here. He listened first. No statue, no spotlight, just a place for reflection. Teenagers would sometimes gather there, talk about life, and read poetry. Others came alone, seeking silence. Even in his absence, the space Denzel once occupied invited presence. A televised tribute tried to sum up Denzel's legacy, but something felt off. Too polished, too dramatic, missing the grit and grace he stood for. Social media responded not with outrage, but with correction. People posted their own tributes, raw, simple, truthful, clips of courtroom victories, photos from protest, lines, letters of reconciliation. The applause he received in life meant less than the action he inspired in death. Inspired by Denzel's story, a judge in a small town began a restorative justice program. Instead of harsh punishment, she prioritized dialogue, healing, and accountability. It wasn't always popular, but it worked. Families torn by violence found paths to understanding. Youth found second chances, not dead ends. Justice, Denzel once said, isn't only about punishment, it's about possibility. A new edition of his memoir was released, including an appendix with never-before-seen writings, notes, and reflections. One entry simply read, "History won't remember me. That's fine. Just remember the truth." It wasn't humility. It was clarity. Because Denzel's greatest act wasn't standing up, it was making space for others to rise.